Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chavav, Daf 26. Wow, fancy number of Masechta Megilla. Friends, who could tell me what Daf Chavav talks about? We're starting the fourth parak of Masechta Megilla. Big stuff. Fourth and final parak of Masechta Megilla. It talks about selling stuff. Selling like the street of the city. Selling a synagogue. Things like that. What do you think? Sounds interesting? At one point we talk about if Jerusalem was divided among the tribes, among the Shvatim. Also an interesting sugya. So, friends, some interesting stuff ahead of us in Daf Chavav, Masechta Megillah. Friends, let's jump in. We're going to start from the beginning of the parak, on Daf Chafei Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom. B'nei ha'ir shemachu rechov v'shelir. So if you have people in a city and they sold the street, the public street in the city, okay? Lochim b'damav beis hakneses. So with the proceeds from selling the street, they can purchase a synagogue. Now, what's special about the street is that, for example, as we learned in Masechta Taanis, they would go out and they would fast and pray in the street when they were fasting. So the street could be used for holy things, and therefore, if they sell the street, so don't just go and buy pizza with it. I mean, pizza is a holy thing as well, but not really. And therefore, you shouldn't use the proceeds from the street to buy pizza, even craft pizza. Shuk Machne Yehuda. Fine. So, but what you can do is you could buy a synagogue. Fine. Beis HaKnesset Solchen Teva, and if you sell a synagogue, you could use that money to buy an aron. Teva Lochen Mitpachos, and if you sell an aron, an ark, so then you can use the proceeds to buy like garments that for the Sefer Torah. Mitpachos, if they sell these like wrappings, these garments of the Sefer Torah, yikhu sfarim. So from the wrappings you can purchase like books of like Nach, of the Nach, like Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Sfarim Lochen Torah, and if they sell these books of Nevi'im and Ksuvim, you could purchase a Sefer Torah. Aval, but the opposite direction, Aval Machru Torah. Now, if they purchase a Sefer Torah, if they sold a Sefer Torah, lo yikhu sfarim, well then you're unable to buy Nevi'im and Ksuvim because that's like a lower level. Sfarim lo yikhu mitpachos, if they sold like Nevi'im and Ksuvim, they shouldn't use the proceeds to purchase these wrappings around Sefer Torah. Mitpachos lo yikhu teva, if you sell these wrappings, do not purchase an ark. Teva lo yikhu beis hakneses. If you sell an ark, do not use the proceeds to purchase a synagogue. Beis hakneses lo yikhu harechov. And if you sell a synagogue, do not use the proceeds to purchase a street. V'chein v'mosrein. And similarly, the leftovers, right? So, for example, let's say you sold an ark and you used the leftovers to purchase, wrappings for Sefer Torah, but you have leftover money. Don't use that money on pizza. All right. Fine. Says the Gemara, so if you have the people of the city that sold the street from the city, okay. So Rabbi Bar Bachana Rabbi Yochanan. So it says Rabbi Bar Bachana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Wait, what just happened? Okay, we said so we said that you can use the proceeds to purchase a synagogue. Fine. Zodivrei Rabbi Menachem Bar Yossi Stumta. Ho 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 ho. Friends, that's really interesting. Another example of one of these stumtas, one of these anonymous people that Rebbe put in the Mishnayos that it's their opinion, which of course, as I pointed out in the Beis Amud Aleph of Masechta Megillah, when we mentioned Rabbi Akiva stumta, that it's super interesting because generally we want to assume Stam Mishnah of Meir, and it's very interesting that there are these other Stam Mishnahs that aren't Reb Meir, to the extent that like there are these people that are called these stumta people that it's not just called Reb Menachem Bar Yossi stumta because one Stam Mishnah is like him. Apparently there are several occasions enough that he's called Reb Menachem Bar Yossi stumta, and Reb Akiva stumta, and Reb Yossi Bar Yehuda stumta. So very, very interesting that there are these other sort of stam people in the Mishnah. It's extremely interesting. So we're saying that this Mishnah, when it says that if you sell a street, so you can use the proceeds to purchase a synagogue, so that is the opinion of Reb Menachem bar Yossi Stumta. Avol, however, Chacham Omrim, the Chacham say Arechov Ein Bo Mishum Kedusha, that the street doesn't have any particular special holiness. So you can buy pizza, according to the rabbis, you could buy pizza with the proceeds of selling the street. From Menachem bar Yossi, my timer. How come Reb Menachem bar Yossi says that this excuse me, is my cough coming back? Oh, what should I do? So, but Reb Menachem bar Yossi says that the reason why the street has holiness, since the nation prays in the streets on public fast days, and also in the Ma'amados, Rashi points out that it's not super clear what the Ma'amados are doing over here, because we learned in Masechta Taanis, the Ma'amados were these people who would pray when public communal offerings were being offered, so that there should be, if they're being offered for the community, so people from the community should be praying at that time. So we said in Masechta Taanis that they would go into synagogues, wherever they may have been, where in their cities, not necessarily in Jerusalem. So they would just go into their synagogues, but it doesn't necessarily say anything there about going into the street. Okay, but certainly on the fast days, they would go out to the street, as we learned in Masechta Taanis. The rabbis say, yeah, inachinami, but that doesn't necessarily make the street like a holy place that you're not allowed to sell. Alright, friends, that was interesting stuff. Let's move on. Beis HaKnesses lo kanteva. If you sell a synagogue, so you could use the proceeds to purchase an ark. Alright. Okay, so it says Shmuel bar Nachmani, the name of Rabbi Yonasan. Lo shanu elo Beis HaKnesses shel kfarim. So it says Shmuel bar Nachmani, the name of Rabbi Yonasan, that when we say that you're allowed to sell, that if you sell a synagogue, just use the proceeds to purchase a ark, so that is specifically a synagogue that's in a village, in a small village. Avol, Beis HaKnesses shel krochin. But if we're talking about a synagogue in a city, like a big city, since there are people that are coming from all over the place to this big city and using the synagogue, lo matzu mizabne le. You're not allowed to sell the synagogue in that case, because it belongs to everybody. There isn't any specific people that have the authority to sell the synagogue. If you have a small little village and the Yidden over there, they made for themselves a synagogue and sort of they're the ones in charge, so they could sell it. But once already you get to a big city, and there's all sorts of people coming to the synagogue, it's hard to sort of say that there are specific people to whom the synagogue belongs to. It belongs to the public. Very interesting. Amr Ravashi says, Ravashi, Haibe Knishta de Mata Mechasya. So says Ravashi that the synagogue in his city, Mata Mechasya, Afal Gavde Me'al Ma'asula, even though people are coming to Mata Mechasya and coming to the synagogue all the time, Kim de Adaita Didi Ka'asu Ibaino Mizabnina Le. Since they're coming to Mata Mechasya to visit me, Ravashi, so I can sell the synagogue if I want to. Kidu in general in a big city. So the synagogue over there, so you might have people coming into the synagogue, so you have people coming into the synagogue, and for that reason, so it's not necessarily clear that there's one owner over there. Now, however, it says Rav Ashi that in Mata Mechaseh, anybody who's coming is coming to see him, and therefore it gives him sort of a special authority over the synagogue, and he says that if he wants to, he would be able to sell the synagogue in Mata Mechaseh. Meisvei, we have a Kasha Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'aseh Beis HaKnesses shel Tursim. Oh, interesting. That there's a story with a synagogue of coppersmiths, Shahay B'Yerushalayim, that was in Jerusalem. Wow. Friends, where do you think it was? I live in Yerushalayim. How, you think it's near, you think it was in Achlaot? You think it's close to where I live? The synagogue of the coppersmiths. Alright, there's a synagogue. There's lots of synagogues. To my left, there's a synagogue out that window. To my right, there's a synagogue out that window. If I go straight ahead of me, there's a synagogue at the end of the block. Behind me, though, that's a different story. Yeah, I'm not sure where behind me. But in all the other directions is a synagogue. Anyways, so there was a coppersmith synagogue in Jerusalem. All right. Yeah, and all these synagogues are named after Moshe Montefiore. So the one to my left is called Yismach Moshe. The one in front of me is called Oel Moshe, which is also the name of this street and also the name of this neighborhood. And then to the one to my right, I think it's called Yanina or something. People from Greece, I think. Let's go weiter. So, so there's a story about told about a synagogue of coppersmiths in Jerusalem, Shemachua the Rabbi Eliezer, and they sold the synagogue to Rabbi Eliezer. Very, very interesting. And he did whatever he wanted over there. He owned it and he did what he wanted there. Now that city, right, that synagogue was in Jerusalem, was in a city, and yet Rabbi Eliezer had the authority. The coppersmiths had the authority to sell their synagogue to Rabbi Eliezer. So So that was a small synagogue in Jerusalem, right? The coppersmith synagogue was a very small synagogue, and I guess they made it. They were sort of in charge of it, and therefore they had the authority to sell it to Rabbi Eliezer. However, I guess in a situation where it was like a big synagogue in a big city, and people are coming in and out all the time, so then there wouldn't necessarily be the authority to sell the synagogue. Meisvei. We have a kasha. So in the context of tsaras, leprosy, so it talks about having leprosy in your house, in your inheritance. All right. So leprosy and tsaras can be in your inheritance. However, Jerusalem does not get the impurity of tsaras. Okay. Because the assumption is that according to the Tanakama, Jerusalem is not part of the inheritance. Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. This is Ruda Anilo Shamaiti. What I heard is Elamakum Migdosh Bavad, that only the temple cannot get tsaras, but other places, how about the Knesset, about the Midrashos Mitamin, but other places in Jerusalem, including synagogues and study halls, are able to get tsaras, right? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, like the Beis Hamikdash is unable to get tsaras, but the rest of Jerusalem, including synagogues and study halls, would be able to get tsaras, and they would be considered your inheritance. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, Jerusalem was divided up amongst the tribes. Now the question is, but even if Jerusalem was divided up amongst the tribes, still, why should synagogues and study halls be able to contract tsaras? Hadikrachin havu. They are in cities. They don't belong to any particular people because people are coming in and out of there all the time. So if what we're saying is correct, that in a city, since people are coming in and out all the time, therefore there isn't any body that has authority to sell it, well then there shouldn't be able to be tsaras in there either. So Emam Rabbi Yehuda, Anilo Shomati Elamakum Mikudosh Bavad. So you could change it to so understand Rabbi Yehuda as meaning that that the only places that do not get tsaras are places that are holy, i.e. the Beis Hamikdash, but not just the Beis Hamikdash, also synagogues and study halls in Jerusalem also would not contract tsaras according to Rabbi Yehuda. So we're not saying that synagogues and stuff can get tsaras, and therefore you could still argue that in cities the synagogues don't belong to any particular body, and therefore they can get tsaras. Fine. And therefore they do not get, right, they don't belong to any particular body, and therefore they do not get tsaras. And Rabbi Yehuda would say, Makom Mikudash, any holy place, would not get tsaras in Jerusalem. Fine. So what are they arguing about, right? The Tanakama had said that nowhere in Jerusalem can get tzaras, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that's not true. The Beis Hamikdash, the synagogues, the study halls, they don't get tzaras, but the rest of Jerusalem can get tzaras. So what's the machlokas? So Tanakama Savar lo nischalku Yerushalayim l'shvatim. That the Tanakama holds that Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. And since Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes, so it's not considered Beis Eretz Achuz Aschem. It's not considered an inheritance. It wasn't divided up. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, Ma pitom, Jerusalem was divided up amongst the tribes, and therefore Jerusalem is able to contract Tumah. Again, not the temple, not the synagogues, but the rest of Jerusalem can contract Tumah, can contract Tzaras, because it was divided up amongst the people. Alright? We've looked at Dani Tanoi, it's like the machlokas of the following Tanoim, the Tanyas, we learned in the Brayso, Mahoyu b'chelko shel Yehuda. So which parts of Jerusalem were in the portion of Judah? Harabayis, so the Temple Mount, Halashachos, all the offices that were in there, Ve'azaros, and the Ezras Noshim, Ezras Yisrael, Ezras Kohanim, those were all in the portion of Judah. And what was in the portion of Benjamin? Ulam, sort of the antechamber to the Heichal, to the sanctuary. Ve'Heichal, the sanctuary, Ve'es Kodesh HaKodashim, and the Kodesh HaKodashim. So the Tanakama says that Harabayis, the offices and the Azaris were in the portion of Judah. The Ulam, the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodashim was in the portion of Benjamin. Okay, there was a small sort of strip of I don't know, Beis Hamikdash that protruded, or I feel like protruded works. Anyways, jutted out from the portion of Judah into the portion of Benjamin. It's very technical. Like just the way that basically the Azara, the Ezras Kohanim until the Mizbeach was in the portion of Judah. Once you get to the Mizbeach, it's already in the portion of Benjamin, but there was like one sliver of the eastern side of the Mizbeach where there's no Yesod, that part is in the portion of Judah. And that is where the altar is built. And Binyamin, who of course lived many years before the temple, or even many years before the Mishkan, he knew that he was gonna sort of not be able to have the entirety of the Beis Hamikdash in his portion, and he was mitzdayer aleh b'chol yom levola, and he wanted to reclaim that portion of the temple that jutted out from Judah's, that like one amma portion that jutted out from Judah's portion into Binyamin's portion. Shenamar chofif olav kol hayom. He was like itching about it. He was itching for it all day. And because Binyamin was so passionate about the Beis Hamikdash, that's why he merited to be the neighbor of the divine. And you can add the next few words. Shenema uvein kseif of shachin. It says that he dwells among God's shoulders. All right. V'haitana savar. Okay, so that sort of opinion obviously is that Jerusalem was divided up amongst the tribes. Right. Part of it was Judah. Part of it was Benjamin. So according to that opinion, Jerusalem was certainly divided up amongst the tribes. V'haitana savar. Whereas the other opinion is lo nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim, that right. So the Tanakama holds that Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. Right. We had seen earlier that the Tanakama holds that all of Jerusalem does not contract tzaras, because none of it was divided up amongst the tribes. And Rabbi Yehuda says that only the Beis Hamikdash and the synagogues and things don't contract tzaras, but the rest of Jerusalem can, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that Jerusalem was divided up amongst the tribes, as we just saw with Judah and Benjamin. Now we're saying that Rabbi Yehuda's Tanakama, who says that all of Jerusalem is unable to contract Tumah, so Tzaras. So he holds that Lo Neschalek Yerushalayim L'Shvatim, that Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. The Tanya is written in the Brayse, Maskirim Batim B'Yerushalayim, that we do not rent out homes in Jerusalem. Like when it comes to the regalim, the festivals, people would not rent out their homes in Jerusalem because it doesn't belong to them. It wasn't divided up amongst the tribes. Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzaddik, Aflomitos, you can't rent out a bed to sleep in. That is why the hosts sort of chaperein the hides of the shlamim that the people are offering. It's just that they can get some kind of a payment, so they take the hides of these animals. Omer Abai says, Abai Shmamino, Orech Ar Lemeshbik Inish, Gulfo Mishcha Ushpize. That says Abai, so we see that it is considered appropriate to leave an earthenware vessel and a hide of an animal at your host. That I think we've seen this before. We've seen this before, and I don't remember. Let's see, where is this? Psachim or something? But anyways, we've seen this before, and I think I pointed out that if you're a guest somewhere, it's appropriate to leave an earthenware vessel and some animal hide at your guest, at your host. So, all right. If anybody ever has any Babylon Talmud Chevra for Shabbos or anything, you might be left with an earthenware vessel and some animal hide. Omar Rave, so says Rave, Lo shanu ela shelo machu shiva tovei ha'ir b'maimed anshe ha'ir. Ava machu shiva tovei ha'ir b'maimed anshe ha'ir, afilu l'mishta be'shichra shapidami. All right, what do you want me to tell you? So says Rava that if you sell a synagogue, right? So if you sell a synagogue, so now the synagogue is still going to retain its holiness unless right? That unless the synagogue is sold by like these 7 very well respected people in the city, and with the full knowledge of all the people in the city. So unless that happens, so then the synagogue is going to retain its sort of holiness. But if the synagogue was sold by like these very fancy people in the city, and the whole city knew about it, so then afilu l'mishtayebe shichra. So as long as sort of was sold with these very fancy people, so then it doesn't retain its holiness anymore, and you could do whatever you want with it, even to buy beer. All right, very interesting. So Shapridami, that would be okay. Ravina havaleau tilo devei knishta. Okay, Ravina somehow had some kind of a pile that was once a synagogue. Also, the commander of Rav Ashi then came before Rav Ashi, Omerle, and he says to Rav Ashi, Ma'u lemizra, can I plant in this pile that was once a synagogue? Omerle, he said, Zil zavne mishiva tovihar b'mamad anshihar v'zra. Well, if you want to plant there, well then go and buy it from these 7 fancy people in the presence of all these other people, and then you'll have a really fun time. I don't know, then you could plant seeds in the pile. Rami Bar Abba called Bani Bey Knishta. Okay, so Rami Bar Abba was building a synagogue. Alright, that sounds nice. Hava Knishta Atika. Now, there was an older synagogue, and he figured, I have a good idea. Why don't I use some materials from the older synagogue to build the new one, right? Basically, like knock it down and use some of the bricks and things. Have a bayla mister livne uchshure mina vayuli la'asam. So Rami Bar Abba had an idea that why doesn't he knock down the old structure, and then he could bring over bricks and beams from the old structure and use it for constructing the new structure. That actually sounds very cool. Build the new synagogue with the materials from the old synagogue, and you kind of have like this, blend of new and old. Original sort of parts from the original synagogue. Yosef Kami Bayale, and Rabbi Bar Abba he had a following conundrum. Hadar of Chizda, the Amr of Chizda, that which of Chizda says, Lo listor be'knishta adabani be'knishta achrin, to say that you shouldn't destroy Ruvain the synagogue until Shimon the synagogue has already been constructed. Has mishum piusa. Maybe the reason over there is because if you just destroy Reuben the synagogue before you've built Shimon the synagogue, you might not end up building Shimon the synagogue, and you just won't have any synagogue at all. But what about in this particular case where he's mamish in the middle of constructing Shimon the synagogue? So maybe there's no concern that he's not going to build it. He's mamish in the middle of building it. He's only disassembling Reuben the synagogue so that he has materials for Shimon the synagogue. So maybe that would be okay, because of course he's going to build Shimon the synagogue. So Tzalakami de Rav Papa. So Rabbi Ba'ama went to Rav Papa, and Rav Papa said, you can't knock down Reuven the synagogue in order to build Shimon the synagogue. The Kami de Rav Huna Ber Rav Yeshua v'Asalei, and also Rav Huna Ber Rav Yeshua, who is like Rav Papa's sidekick, he also said that you cannot build, you knock down Reuven the synagogue to build Shimon the synagogue. Omar Rava, says Rava, Haibe Knishta Chalufa v'Zabuna. So when it comes to a synagogue, if you sort of like swapped it for something else, or if you sold it, shari, so then the synagogue is now allowed. So if you have a synagogue and then you kind of like swap its holiness onto, you sell it, so now the money becomes holy, or whatever you swap out for the synagogue, but then the synagogue is no longer holy. Ogura umashkona, but if you rent it out, or if you just kind of set it as like a mortgage, as a collateral, well then also it remains holy. My time how come because it remains holy. Fine. Livne nami, also if you take bricks from a synagogue, chalufinu v'zabnuninu, if you swap them out for something, or if you sell them, shari, well then they're no longer holy, they become, you can use them for what you want. Uzufinu, but if you lend them, also, so then you can't just do whatever you want with them because they remain holy. Panimili ba'atika, that's specifically old, like bricks. Kilu. So those are like old bricks that were actually part of a structure, part of a building. But if we're talking about new bricks that haven't yet been used in the synagogue, that you're just planning on using them in a synagogue, leis lanba, well then it's okay. They don't have the kedusha yet. And even according to the opinion who says that simply setting something aside is significant, that is hanimile kigona orig beged lames. That's specifically in a situation like if you've woven a garment for a dead fellow, so the garment is basically done. So if you set it aside specifically for a shroud, so then it's considered significant because there's no other work that needs to be done to make it into a shroud. It already is a shroud, and once you set it aside to be used as a shroud, so then it's already it takes on that status. But this is more similar to like spinning threads. That when you have this threads already, they're not yet a garment. You then still have to weave them into a garment. And nobody's going to say that setting them aside is significant. And therefore, if you have bricks for a building that haven't actually yet been built into the synagogue, so then even saying that, well, I'm going to use these bricks for the synagogue, that doesn't make them holy because you still actually have to build them into something. They're not like ready to go as is. All right. The rabbis taught Tashmisha mitzvah nizraken Tashmisha kedushin ignozin. This is super interesting. That that items that were used in the context of a mitzvah, so you could throw them in the garbage. Tashmisha kedushin ignozin. But if something has holiness, so then you can't throw it in the garbage. You have to bury them. So ve'elu and tashmisha mitzvah. These are examples of items that were used in the context of a mitzvah. A sukkah, lulav, shofar, tzitzis. These are examples of things that were used in the context of a mitzvah. But once the mitzvah is over, you can get rid of them. And the following are examples of things that are holy. Dluskame svarim tefillin umzuzis. These bags, pouches that you would put, I guess Sifrei Torah or Navi, tefillin, mezuzis, v'tikshel Sefer Torah. Where am I? V'tikshel Sefer Torah, like the bag that you put the Sefer Torah in. Although wait, I wonder if maybe Duskame, I don't know. Or maybe it's Duskame Svarim. Maybe like these bags that the Nach, the Nevi'im and Ksuvim go in, and then Tefillin, Mezuzis. These are Tashmisha Kedusha, things that have holiness. V'tikshel Sefer Torah, the bag that a Sefer Torah goes in. V'natikshel Tefillin, or the bag that Tefillin goes in. V'tuosein, and the straps of the Tefillin. These are examples of things that are inherently holy, and therefore you have to bury them. You cannot throw them away. Okay. Amar Rava, says Rava, Mereish Ava Amina. Initially, I thought Hai Kursaya Tashmish Detashmishu Vishari. I used to think that the bima, that the what's it called, the lectern, maybe, I don't know, the thing that you put the Sefer Torah on. So Rava said initially he thought that this thing that you put the Sefer Torah on, so tashmish detashmishu, he thought that it was like twice removed, meaning you have the Sefer Torah, it then goes on like a cloth which is covering this bima. So he figured that the bima was kind of twice removed, vishari, and therefore I guess you'd be able to throw it out or do whatever you want with it. Came the chazina the most ve'ilove Sefer Torah, but Rava says that once he noticed that sometimes they wouldn't have a cloth there, and they would just put the Sefer Torah directly on the bima. So Amina Tashmish Kedushahu V'Aser. Then I realized that the bima itself was something that is holy in and of itself, and it is forbidden. You can't just throw it out. But Rava says, Rava Mereishav Amina. Initially, I thought Hai Prisa Tashmish Detashmishu. Initially, I thought that this garment that was inside of the aron, that was inside of the ark, that kind of like I don't know, was like surrounding the walls of the ark. Came the chazina the aifele umanche sifrei ilave. I'm sorry. So ani prisa tashmishu. So initially I thought that this garment that would go around the walls of the ark was sort of twice removed, right? That wasn't directly used for the Sefer Torah. Came the chazina the aifele umanche sifra ilave amina tashmish kedushu. But once I noticed that they would sometimes fold up these garments and put the Sefer Torah on this folded up garment, so then he realized that they actually are themselves holy and have to be treated accordingly. The Aser. Rava says, Rava, I tevusa the irfit. If you have like a ark that kind of got like broken, mi'abda teva zutrasi shari. So you'd be allowed to make it into like a smaller ark, kursaya osir, but you can't make it into a bima, into like a something to put a Sefer Torah on. V'amar Rava says, I prisa divala. If you have like a covering of a Sefer Torah that got worn out, leme'ebde prisa lesifrei shari. So you'd be allowed to use it to make coverings for Nevi'im and Ksuvim, the Chumashin also, but you would not be allowed to make it for Chumashin. No, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The lining of the ark that got worn out, you can use it to make it coverings for Sifrei Torah, but not for Chumashim, which are basically just like one book of the Torah. Ba'amuravan says, Rava, Hane zvile de chumshe v'kamtere de sifrei tashmish kedusha ninu v'nignozim. Okay? That these bags of or for the chumashim and these other boxes that you put the that you would put the Sfarim in, that you put the Sifrei Torah in, so they are holy, and you have to treat them v'nignaz, and you have to bury them. Fine, Pshita, this is obvious. I may have thought Hanilav l'chavod of Avidon l'inturi ba'am avidei kamash malana. I may have thought that they're not necessarily made for honor, but just to sort of protect the Sefer Torah. So maybe they're not super fancy. So kamash malana, that they're pretty fancy. Now says the Gemara, interesting. So there was a synagogue of these Roman Jews in Machoza, where Rava lived. Interesting. And this synagogue was like attached to some room that they had a corpse in. And Kohanim wanted to pray in the synagogue, but because the synagogue was attached to this open room that had a corpse in it, so the Kohanim can't go in because the whole synagogue is Tamei Tumas HaOel. So Amar le Rava, so they said to Rava, "No, what do we do?" So he said to them, Dalu Tevusa, take the ark, pick it up, Osuvua, Davle Klietza Osu Lenachas. Klietza Osu Lenachas, Enim Makabatum. Let's read that again. So he said to them, Tevusa Osvua, what's the bava, right? So Rava says, he advises them, why don't you take the ark, pick it up, and use it to block the doorway, so that it's sealed. And then if the doorway is sealed, so then the tumah will not come through, and the Kohanim could pray over there. Because an ark is a wooden vessel that you're not planning to move, right? The idea is you take the ark and you leave it there, right? When's the last time you saw somebody move the ark of a temple? The ark of the temple stays there. So he says that you could, if you pick up the ark and use it to block the doorway, then that would be acceptable, because the ark is a wooden vessel that is not generally moved. And a wooden vessel that is meant to be stationary, so then it does not receive tumah v'chotzes b'fnei tumah, and it also creates a separation from tumah. So Rava says, just take the ark, use it to block the doorway, and then the tumah will be contained. Amru le Rabbanon le Rava, so the rabbi said to the Rava, wait, but there's more. But sometimes they actually move the ark if they need to put a Torah scroll. They need someone to rest a Torah scroll to read it. So sometimes they'll actually move the ark to put the Torah scroll on it. Which makes the ark something that is moved when it is full and empty, and i.e., if it's movable, so then it will be able to transact tumah, and therefore you cannot use it as a separation to block the doorway. So he says to them, if that's the case, then yeah, you would not be allowed to use the ark to block the doorway in the temple. Omar Marzutra, so says Marzutra, that if you have sort of coverings of Sifrei Torah that they got worn out, so you can use them to make shrouds for a meis mitzvah, for somebody who passes away and doesn't have anybody to bury him. V'zoi genizason, and this would be how you bury these cloths, and how you store them away. V'amar Rava, says Rava, Sefer Torah shabala, if you have a Sefer Torah that got worn out, goes in also etzel Talmid Chacham, v'afilu shona halachis. That's very interesting, that if you have a Sefer Torah that got worn out, so you bury it next to a Talmid Chacham. You bury the Sefer Torah next to a Talmid Chacham. V'afilu shona halachis. Even somebody who didn't necessarily learn Gemara, but learned halacha, but learned Mishnayos, so then you could bury the Sefer Torah next to that fellow. Amr B'acha Bar Yaakov V'chlicheres, and in an earthenware vessel. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Unesatem b'chlicheres l'man yamdu yomim rabim," and you put it in an earthenware vessel so that it will last a long time. V'amar Papi Mishmei Derave,
says Rav Papi the name Rava mi beit knishta levei rabbanon shari, that you're allowed to make a synagogue into a study hall. Mi beit rabbanon levei knishta asur, but you're not allowed to make a study hall into a synagogue. Interesting. Rav Papa mishmei de Rava masni ipcha, whereas Rav Papa in the name of Rava says it's taka the opposite, that you're allowed to make a study hall into a synagogue, but not vice versa. Rav Acha kavasa Rav Papi mistavra, says Rav Acha that it makes sense like Rav Papi, Rav Yeshua ben Levi, beis hakneses mutar asosu beis hamedrash shema mina, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that you're allowed to make a synagogue into a study hall, and therefore it would make sense like Rav Papi who says just that you're allowed to make a synagogue into a study hall, but not a study hall into a synagogue. Super interesting daf. And we started the fourth parak of Masechta Megillah. We talked about, selling different holy things, beginning with the street of the city, which interestingly we said was the opinion of Menachem bar Yossi Simtoa, and then synagogues and Sefer Torah, things like that. We then discussed if a synagogue in a city is able to be sold, because since people are coming in all the time, maybe it doesn't actually belong to one particular body and it cannot be sold. And then we sort of launched from there into an interesting discussion about, is Jerusalem divided amongst the tribes? One opinion is that no, it's not divided amongst any of the tribes. The other opinion is that actually it's divided amongst Yehuda and Binyamin, and different portion of the Beis Hamikdash are in the portion of Judah, and different portions are in the portions of Benjamin. And we also said that things that were used for mitzvahs, once the mitzvah is over, so then you can kind of dispose of them. For example, sukkah, lulav, shofar, but other things that actually have kedusha, like tefillin, Sefer Torah, things like that. So then you have to bury them. So yeah, that was pretty interesting, friends. That was Daf Chav Vav Masechta Megillah. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.